Welcome back to Developmental Psychology. I'm your professor, Ryan Keith, and I'm going to hope that in this video, my audio and video work out a little bit better. And this video is just a relatively short one in which I want to do a little bit of a primer or an introduction, or even for some of you guys, a review on some of the concepts tied to the development of moral beliefs and moral understandings. Remember, when we talk about ethics and morals, and I'm sure an ethicist, a philosopher, or somebody who works in humanities would be able to articulate better the difference between morals and ethics. But in this discussion, we're really going to treat them as relatively the same thing. It's this general understanding. Really, what we're talking about is an understanding of what it is you should do and shouldn't do. Psychologists have long wondered, are there universal understandings of ethics and moral beliefs, or is this something tied to our culture? Is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we come to understand over time? This is a disagreement that, as far as writings show us, go all the way back to the earliest Greek philosophers and continue all the way through today. In fact, I included for you guys a video clip that I really like, a segment of 60 minutes as one of your assigned videos about some evidence that we maybe have some understanding of moral and ethical beliefs really early on in life. But as far as traditional frameworks for the development of moral understanding goes, really it comes down to a name that you might already know from an ethics class you've taken before or a psychology class you've taken before, a guy named Lawrence Kohlberg, and then also Jean Piaget. Remember, Piaget is the big cognitive development guy we've talked about before. I want to talk a little bit about the specifics of Lawrence Kohlberg's perspectives first, and then talk about what I want you guys to take away from that. And then we'll talk a little bit in contrast about what Jean Piaget saw in the development of morality and how we can reconcile some of this stuff together. So Lawrence Kohlberg's view, if you look in your textbook and you look at your assigned readings, you'll see that he really looked at moral development as occurring in three primary stages: pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional morality. Even just looking at these names, you get an understanding of what he thought morality really meant. That there was this conventional understanding that most people had. There was an underdeveloped pre-conventional morality where you didn't understand really everything you needed to, and then an after-the-fact kind of post-conventional morality that people could come to understand if they were really advanced and they thought a lot about this stuff. We're going to talk about these different perspectives, some of the takeaways, and some of the problems here also. Unlike a lot of other developmental theorists, Lawrence Kohlberg did not believe that as we marched through our lives, like Piaget did, that he did not believe that as we marched through our lives, we went through these stages, and that there were certain points at which individuals possessed pre-conventional, conventional, or post-conventional morality. Kohlberg believed that he could look at adults and identify that people who had behavior problems, who didn't follow the law or followed problematic rules, it was because they didn't have a complex enough understanding of what was right and what was wrong and why that was. So what exactly were pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional morality? Pre-conventional morality was about following just the basest rules of why you should do what you should do, and a very egocentric, to borrow from Jean Piaget's work, a very egocentric understanding of what morality really meant, that at the basic level, you did right or wrong in order to get a reward or avoid a punishment. Conventional morality involves following the rules of society, doing what your duty is, or following the rules of what a good or bad person should do. And post-conventional morality has to do with making complex conclusions about what's right and what's wrong. Furthermore, these three main stages can be broken down into 6 total substages. So for Kohlberg, each one had 2 separations. I'm going to include it. Oh, by the way, if you're looking at the slides for middle childhood, you should see a chart that breaks down Kohlberg's perspectives on this pretty effectively. But if you look at pre-conventional morality, you see it's broken down into 2 main stages, first having to do with punishment and then having to do with reward. The idea being that we have a hard time looking forward to reward until we really understand punishment, that we'll avoid something bad first and then come to understand something positive. Following that, moving into conventional morality, the first thing that we do, just really coming out of this understanding of rewards and punishments, is doing something in order to do what a good person does, follow the rules of good behavior. When we look at the kinds of cartoons that not really young kids, but like elementary and middle school kids enjoy. For me, it was what Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers, Dragon Ball Z, the things that all of these cartoons had in common, but even the action movies that I watched as a kid had in common is that the good guys were good and the bad guys were bad, right? And even when you look at really popular movies like the Terminator, right, that were around when I was a kid. The Terminator is bad, and the robots are bad, and the good people are good, and the good people do good things, and the bad people do bad things. This makes for a very understandable world and a very black and white understanding of how the world works. You might know some people, like in your own life, who understand the world in this way, that there are good people and there are bad people. We've talked some about the complicated nature of understanding this sort of thing, that just because, for example, somebody is arrested for committing a crime does not mean that they are in their core a bad person. In fact, we know that a lot of people who get arrested are falsely accused, and that a lot of people who commit crimes never get arrested. Stepping beyond this third stage into the fourth stage, the second half of conventional morality, as we get more advanced, people start to understand not just doing what is your role, but also what is your individual duty, being obedient to the people who require obedience of you. This might be in the most basic sense, like what you do in the military or at your job or for your family. But again, if we look at the fiction that appeals to people these days, right, there's a lot of being loyal to your family, being loyal to your group, being loyal to your nation. Loyalty and duty are a big part of conventional morality. But as you can guess, this is itself not even the most complicated version of what moral or immoral, ethical or unethical behavior is. As we step into post-conventional morality, Lawrence Kohlberg's model started to get more abstract, assuming that individuals could think more abstractly about what was right and wrong. The first stage led us into understanding the difference between a moral and a legal right, or an ethical versus legal right. The idea being that the law isn't always correct. Just because it's the law doesn't mean it's right. And just because we arrest people, it doesn't mean that prison will make them better people. You yourself have likely been in a situation where you had to try to understand whether the rule was worth following or if it was a dumb rule. If you were going to violate the rule, not just because it was selfish and you wanted what you wanted, but you were going to violate the rule because you thought it was stupid. It's against the law, for example, to drive over the speed limit. But if you have a medical emergency, right, a family member, a child, an animal in your car, are you willing to exceed that speed limit to get them to the medical care that they need, even though that technically involves breaking rules, right? Most of you guys probably would say you would be willing to. And in this sense, Lawrence Kohlberg would say that you show an understanding of post-conventional morality. The final stage of post-conventional morality involves understanding the difference between an individual right and kind of like a collective good. The point being that you understand that just because the whole group tells you that something is the right thing to do doesn't mean it necessarily is. It means that you can understand individually what's right and what's wrong, and you can make those choices for yourself. So, like, if you were to watch any of the Avengers movies, for example, when invariably somebody from the government or from S.H.I.E.L.D. or from some similar organizations, even another Avenger tells Captain America or Iron Man or the Hulk or Thor or anybody what to do, you know ultimately they're going to violate that rule. They're going to say, you know what, I know you're saying this is what's right, but I know what's right more than you do. I'm the hero on the front lines, and I can step into this role and decide to save the world however I want to. In this sense, what we see is a couple of things. In Kohlberg's model, it involves understanding morality in more and more complex ways as we step through these 6 stages. It also involves being able to make individual choices about morality. At first, we don't even understand the idea of good and bad. We just understand what will bring good or bad consequences to us, right? A lot of arguments, for example, about the role that religion plays in our society is centered on this understanding of morality, that without the promise of eternal salvation or the threat of eternal damnation, people wouldn't be willing to do what it is they need to do. And while it's possible to motivate people through fear of consequences or the promise of rewards, ultimately, wouldn't you rather be surrounded by people who understand morality in a larger sense? Your roommate doesn't murder you for your sandwich, not because they are going to avoid jail time, but because they know it's probably not a good thing to murder you. But one of the real criticisms of Lawrence Kohlberg's model is that it's very Western-centric and it's very Anglo-centric. It's very individualistic centric. This assumption that people are more advanced when they come to have an understanding of individual morality, that you can break the rules in order to be successful in post-conventional morality, is a really Western way of looking at things. If we were to look in South America or East Asia or in sub-Saharan Africa at collectivistic societies, what we would see is that even the most cognitively advanced individuals look at morality in a very different way. That because morality is not about the welfare of the individual, it's about the welfare of the whole. The idea of breaking social norms or social rules to do what you individually think of as right is simply not something people would think to do. It's unheard of. It's selfish. It's dishonorable. In order to do the right thing like that, you would be definitely doing the wrong thing. So, in contrast to Lawrence Kohlberg's model, which is about these 6 stages, Jean Piaget's perspective on morality was really centered in just 2 main perspectives. That we start with this idea of moral realism or universal morality. And as we move out of moral realism or universal morality, we can move into autonomous or individualized morality. Moral realism or universal morality is the idea that there is a universal good and bad, that somehow the universe keeps a tally of what's good and what's bad. And if you do good things will happen to you. And if you do bad things will happen to you. That there are good people and good deeds and bad deeds. And it's this very simplistic perspective when it comes to looking at right and wrong. Again, there are a lot of children, but there are also a lot of adults who look at the world this way, that rules are good and breaking rules is bad, and that there are people who keep the law and there are people who break the law. There are people who deserve rewards and people who deserve punishments. And even Piaget understood that the comfort that was afforded by a system like this. The world isn't complex, it isn't scary, it's simple. There are good people who can be trusted and bad people who can't. When we look at social psychology or we look at more advanced autonomous or individual morality, in contrast, Piaget said that really we came to understand this idea that different people have different understandings of morality. That's the idea of autonomous morality. Not only can we make moral choices on our own, but as we come to understand other people, we understand that what we think of as right is not necessarily what they might think of as right. An example of this is that you might belong to a faith that says you need to be at church every Sunday or every Saturday or every Wednesday, or that you need to pray in a particular way or pray at a particular time or every day, for example. Autonomous morality would mean that rather than determining that everyone else who practices another spirituality is bad, autonomous morality says that you understand that in making your own decision to think of this as a good thing to do, you also understand that other people can do the same thing, that other faiths don't make them bad or threatening, they're just different. In this way, Piaget was tying an understanding of morality to that theory of mind stuff that we talked about before, that understanding that other people are people with their own perspectives also means that other people can do bad things for good reasons, or do good things for bad reasons, or think they're doing the right thing when in fact you feel like they're doing the very, very wrong thing. So what does this mean as we talk about morality overall? It's a tough subject, and it's tough to know exactly what morality means. It's hard to get anybody on the same page when it comes to this stuff because the world is a really complex place. And that ultimately, and again, we talk about this a lot more when we get to social psychology, there isn't any such thing as a good person or a bad person, that there isn't even somebody who does a good thing or a bad thing. People just do things as a result of the situations in which they find themselves. And sometimes these things bear good fruit and we have positive outcomes, and sometimes everything turns out real bad. So I know that's not really comforting, but that kind of a perspective demonstrates a cognitive complexity that both Kohlberg and Piaget would say is a sign of advanced development. I'm not just patting myself on the back there. I'm saying that you and I can all do this sort of kind of complex thinking that they think of as a more abstract way of understanding the world. So if you have questions about morality or anything else in the class, I know everything's a little weird right now, but you can get in touch with me during office hours. Just jump into those office hours at officehours.page.link/meet or call me at 395-5544. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, and remember, take care of your mental health, not just your physical health, right? It's real easy to go a little bit stir crazy sitting inside. Keeping that routine of getting up at the same time, getting dressed, doing your hair, putting on deodorant, right? Working at the same time, it does wonders not just for your productivity and physical health, but also your sense of positivity also. Cool. Well, if you have any questions, just reach out and let me know. I'm still your professor, Ryan Keith, and I look forward to talking to you more about other elements of developmental psychology.